I lived with a serial killer. When I was a teenager, I dated a guy a couple of years older than me. We'll call him Nash. He was always exceptionally sweet and would tell me how I deserved the world. We never really broke up. He would just move away, and it would be agreed that we wouldn't date anymore. We would always end up connecting back with each other no matter what. Then, when I was 17, he went to jail for stabbing his stepdad. We hadn't seen each other in almost a year at that point. Afterwards, he would never talk about it in detail, but he would explain that he saw no choice at the time. His stepdad even went to his court hearings and stated that he wasn't to blame, and that he had made the mistake of cornering him in a violent rage. When he got out of jail, he seemed to be a different person. He was much more mature. He got a well-paying job right away. He discovered the love of cooking. He was clean and organized and well-read. He looked me up the first day he got back in town, and we slowly started developing a friendship and eventually started casually dating. He began staying at my home on weekends, and then after a few months he needed a place to stay for a month and a half between selling his trailer and moving into a nicer rental, and things got to be really good. We were talking about maybe moving in together, and he would hint at the idea of proposing. Then one day he started drinking again and became unsettling and weird. Almost immediately after he started drinking, he began lying, and I started to get the big heebie-jeebies. He would say he was leaving for work, but then an hour later, his co-worker would come to the door and ask where he was. When I would ask him about it, instead of calmly explaining that he was at his mom's on the way to work or something, he would storm off and ignore my calls for days. I immediately ended the relationship, telling him he could stay at his mom's until his place was move-in ready. A friend of mine came over to my house and helped me neatly pack up all of his stuff, and we dropped it off at his mom's for him. I can't tell you exactly why, but we also decided to put chain locks on the door that Nash had a key to, because even though he had given my key back, I had a completely unfounded suspicion that he had made a copy without telling me. That night, Nash came to my door without calling and without knocking, and tried to let himself in. I had rested my skateboard against the door, so when it opened, I heard the crash. I heard him cuss under his breath and leave. The next day I came home from walking my dog with a male friend who I had been friends with my entire life and would hang out with the both of us. And there was a picture I had painted for Nash on the front porch of my house. It had blood splattered all over it. I asked my friend what I should do, and he was honestly kind of horrified. It was too big to fit in the garbage can, and I didn't want this blood-covered painting just sitting around my house, so later that night we ended up burning it in the outdoor fireplace. A few days later, Nash called me and asked if he could come over later and talk. I said that was fine, and he told me he would be over at about 7 p.m. At 8:30 he hadn't called or shown up, so I was sitting on my computer when I got a call from my aunt, who had a police scanner. Nash had apparently broken into a woman's home with a gun, and she had shot her own shotgun at him. The police eventually caught him running in the direction of my house. He went back to jail, but only for about 6 months, since they couldn't find a gun he had, and because the woman whose house he broke into didn't want to cooperate with police. He ended up getting a very light charge. Around this time, I had started dating someone else. We'll call him Shane, and the very first time we were out around town together, Nash saw us and came over and ripped his shirt off, challenging Shane to a fight. Shane responded just by kind of chuckling in discomfort, and we got back into the car and left. This became a semi-regular occurrence, and then one night we were cuddled up in my living room watching TV, and we heard something hit the patio window really loudly. We went and looked around, expecting there to be a bird or something, but we couldn't find anything. The next day, after Shane had left, I had gone outside onto the small patio, and in the light of day, I could see what we had missed the night before. It was a bullet for a hunting rifle. It looked like it had been thrown at the window from over the fence. I ended up moving away and marrying Shane. Nash actually randomly showed up once when we were meeting up with an all-round mutual friend, and it was quite weird, but it was pretty coincidental, so we shrugged it off. A little while later, Nash went back to jail for breaking into another woman's house. He was released after a certain amount of time after that as well. Then, almost immediately after his release, he was all over the national news because he had been caught trying to kidnap multiple children, going so far as to take one child and choke them until the father by coincidence found them and was able to pull him off of him. The boy survived, but he was unconscious for a while. He suffered no brain damage, but was pretty shook and likely will be for life. After Nash was incarcerated for that, he was arrested right after his release for the murder of a woman in the town we had grown up in several years earlier, because they had only discovered her remains whilst he was in jail. Details were never publicly released because the trial is still ongoing, but the rumor is that he broke into her house, having been casual acquaintances with her, and killed her, and then moved her body to a small forested area on a mutual friend's parents' house. He also allegedly killed his cellmate while he was in jail, but he was never found guilty because the jail mishandled a bunch of the evidence and the prison guards mixed up their stories a bit, so the case couldn't prove he did it beyond a reasonable doubt. His cellmate was just a poor young kid, barely 19, in jail for theft. Of course the kid should have gone to jail, but in no way should that have been a death sentence. While he's been in jail, he has apparently attacked multiple female prison guards by choking them. There are of course rumors around town that some other missing people were also his doing, and there's a bunch more true stories about women catching him trying to break into their house that never made it to court because they didn't know who it was at the time, so police had no one to look into, and they only realized it was Nash when his face became plastered all over the media. I often think of the fact that I intimately knew this person, and sometimes I feel guilty for not having seen the signs. Other times I feel creeped out that I could have been a victim of his. I feel like I somehow should have known that I was living with a potential serial killer, but until he started drinking, he truly seemed like a stand-up guy that had made bad decisions and was doing his best to make a decent life for himself. Up until very recently, I never spoke about him or even acknowledged him in any way. Obviously, my husband knows, but he knows it makes me uncomfortable and we don't discuss it. Creep in my backyard. Years ago, I lived in a condo with my two dogs, Smokey and the Bandit, brother and sister from the same litter that I got as puppies. For reference, their mother was a Sheltie, Smokey's father was a German Shepherd, and Bandit's was a Husky. They were both a good size with long thick coats, which made them look a lot bigger than they actually were. Personality-wise, they were both big babies who loved people and attention, and would happily lick you to death if given the chance. One night, I got home late, like 2:30-ish, and took them out for a run and a pee, something I had done many times. I lived in the back side of the condo on the ground level, and the backyard was a huge park, like setting divided up by intersecting pathways, kind of like a square with 4 quadrants surrounded by other condos and houses. The area right in front of my condo was a big field with a pathway about halfway through running parallel to the condo. To the left of that was an area around the same size, divided up between a large playground area and a forested area with a pathway running through it. I headed straight out of my condo and across the pathway that divided into the big open field. I had noticed someone, a tall skinny man, dressed all in black, whistling while walking along the path I had crossed over. As I ran with the dogs, I noticed the whistling stopped, so I looked over my shoulder and saw the man had diverted off the path and was now walking in a direct line towards me. I immediately thought, "Oh crap, this can't be good." Took a hard left and ran into the playground area. It was well lit, but there was also a huge man-made hill that I assume was leftover dirt from when something was built that had become grass covered. I ran around the hill into the dark where he wouldn't be able to see me. I stayed there for a minute to formulate my "oh my god, what the heck" plan. Luckily, I knew the area very well, having spent hours walking everywhere with the dogs. The playground was bordered on one side by the forested area, so I crept through the trees to where the path ran through, circling back toward my condo, keeping close to the shadowed area, while hoping and praying that I had lost him or he had lost interest. The forested area ends basically where the backyard of my condo begins. Still hidden, I looked around the open area ahead and couldn't see anyone. I made a break for it and started running like hell. Up to this point, it was just like any other walk for my dogs, who had happily galloped along beside me the entire time, seemingly unaware of any danger. As I left the protection of the forest, I saw the bugger jump out of a nearby group of bushes. I had a good head start on him, but didn't know how fast the bugger was, so I just kept running, not looking back. What happened next still amazes me to this day. As I was running, the dog still at my side, Smokey the female, all of a sudden stopped dead in her tracks, turns around, and assumed the "don't mess with me boy" stance, and started snarling and growling at the bugger, which stopped him dead in his tracks too. Bandit the male stuck right by my side like glue until we got to my patio. I turned and looked back and almost laughed at the bugger. Smokey was still standing her ground in full-on guard dog mode, and he was standing there looking at her, hands up, in surrender. I called Smokey to come, and she backed away slowly, barking and growling until she decided it was good, then turned around and ran right back to me. I kept my eyes on the bugger the entire time. He never moved until the dogs and I went back inside, which we did as soon as Smokey got back. I immediately called 911, and within minutes the entire backyard area was swarming with cops. The cop who interviewed me said there had been numerous reports of sexual assaults in our area, and they figured it was the same guy. Unfortunately, other than tall, skinny, and wearing all black, I had zero info on what he looked like. I don't know if they ever caught him or anything else about it. When everyone was gone, I had a good long cuddle with my wonder dogs, complete with them licking away my tears. After the adrenaline and everything wore off, the gravity of what could have happened and how damn lucky I was finally hit me. For the record, I had done lots of different modes of training with them, but never anything that involved protection. What they did was 100% instinct, and that I didn't even know they had in them. Creepy trucker. When I was about 20, in early 1970s, I was hitchhiking from my family home to where I went to college. The route was not on interstate highways, but rather on state highways and roads. At some point, a trucker picked me up. The ride was fairly uneventful until we were going along, and as we approached Ithaca, He said something about how the crew at where he was supposed to drop off his shipment would be on their lunch break for an hour starting at 12 and wouldn't be back until 1 p.m. He said that since it was 12:30, we would have to pull off the road and wait for a while before going into town. I looked at my watch, which showed the time to be 11:30, which meant that there was no reason for us not to proceed into town before the lunch break a half hour in the future. I corrected him about the time, but he insisted that my watch was wrong. I was sure that it wasn't, but he would not listen. So there we were, in the middle of pretty much nowhere, on a 2-lane state highway surrounded by woods. He pulled over to the side of the road and parked. Just great. To say that it was awkward would be an understatement. I was a typical looking young college student of the day. I had the natural beauty of youth, a cute figure, beautiful long blonde straight hair, and was undoubtedly wearing blue jeans and some sort of a t-shirt, the uniform of youth at the time and since then. I was presumably carrying a purse and maybe a duffel bag containing my possessions. I guarantee that I didn't have any serious money on me. If I had had a lot of spare money, I wouldn't have been hitchhiking. So, back to the road stop. We exchanged some neutral comments. I was mostly looking out the window, thinking to myself that there was not a lot of traffic passing by in either direction, and if I had to jump out of the cab, I had nowhere to run to but down the side of the sparsely travelled road or into the woods. Then he said, "You know, you have beautiful hair." Oh my God, my blood pressure must have skyrocketed. I choked out a meek "thank you" and went back to looking out the window and considering my options. Next comment. If you're tired, you can climb back into the bunk area and rest if you'd like. Kill me now. I politely declined. Next. Would you mind if I held your hand? No, really, seriously. Kill me now. I cannot believe that I held it together enough to calmly respond that no, I wasn't comfortable with that. So the rest of the time passed by until it was almost 1 p.m. by his calculation, but really just 12 by my watch. We didn't say too much. As you all can imagine, I was frightened out of my mind. I cannot believe that I hadn't burst into tears out of the pure stress of the situation. Then he finally said it was time to head on into town. As we approached Ithaca, he said that he would have to drop me off at the edge of town since he wasn't allowed to have people in the truck with him. He went on to say that if I wanted a ride the rest of the way, I could wait for him while he went to drop off his loads, and he would pick me back up when he finished. I mumbled some words of thanks and said I would think about it. I got out of the truck, and then, fearing he would come back to find me, I went to hide out somewhere for a few hours until I was confident that he would have presumed that I had gone on my way. Then I stuck out my thumb and found a ride the rest of the way to where I was going. By the way, I checked my watch against the local time, and my watch was correct. Just as I suspected, he had been lying about what time it was. Man with chains in the woods. I live in the southeastern US, in an apartment in the woods, surrounded by lots of hiking trails. I have a dog who looks kind of like and trots like a coyote. Lots of people ask me if she is, but she's really just half husky, half rough collie. I often walk and hike the trails around my apartment alone with my dog, but usually at a different time of day, when people are out more. One week, my younger sister, a college student, came to visit me. She wanted to go on a hike, but since it was a work day and I'm a new grad with a job, it had to be after I got off. As soon as I finished work, we headed out. It would get dark fairly early, so we wanted to hurry to make it to the lake bridge and back before the bats come out. It's a real problem. We were hiking a while and noticed hardly anyone was out. We only passed 1 or 2 people in 25 minutes. We started to get to the lake bridge about half hour after leaving, and the sun was starting to set when a man, walking kind of slow, came off the bridge and said, "Why, hello, that looks like a nice dog you have there," and stopped to eye us up and down. He was holding a few sets of heavy chains, bike chains maybe, I don't know, and was just acting so odd. He was holding them out and swinging them back and forth. He then stopped again and said, "Wise of you to choose a dog over a man, much less a problem." My sister and I were like, "What the hell?" We had to turn around to head home though, and did encounter him against a tree with his chains on the way back. He kept staring at my dog again and did start walking down the path in our direction again. It was twilight now, and I was so concerned for our safety that my sister and I ran quite a ways down the path, stopped and looked back, and then were cautious the whole way home. We passed a couple of other people in the woods as well, thank God, but only like 2 of them. I don't know what would have happened if he didn't look so wary of my dog. I was kind of afraid he was unstable and might try to hit her with the chains. All I had was my dog and pocket knife. But I am definitely never hiking after work during months when the sun sets that early again.